That's not going to happen until May, but 50% of your score comes from multiple choice, and so that is a skill that we are going to practice. But also 50% of your score comes from the free response questions, and so that obviously also has to be something that we practice. So the free response questions, or as we call them in the AP community, FRQs. In the FRQ section, you'll respond to 3 questions with written answers. All 3 questions will present authentic geographic situations or scenarios, and at least 2 of them will ask you to explain and analyze spatial relationships across geographic scales, like to compare a national data with like an urban center, for example, or between 2 different countries or something like that. There are going to be 3 types of FRQs. One is just going to be that's just straight up text. The second is going to ask you to analyze and interpret data, like a table of data or a pie chart or something like that, or an image or a map. And the third question will feature 2 stimuli. So therefore, like you could get 2 images or a picture and a data chart, or a picture of the location and then a map of the location. What's really important on these FRQ questions is that they have different task verbs, okay? And what I always do is when I would give people like an actual physical test, I would tell them to circle the task verbs, which is harder for us to do because I'm not going to be actually physically handing you a test. But what I do think is important for you to understand is that you want to look at what clues the task verb is giving you. So like when it says compare, you want to provide a description or explanation of the similarities and or differences. When it says define, you want to provide a specific meaning for a word or concept. Also, when it says describe, provide specific and relevant characteristics of a specified topic. Explain, provide information about how or why a relationship, process, pattern, position, or outcome occurs using evidence and or reasoning. And identify, indicate or provide information about specified topic without elaboration or explanation. I have this image of a runner running with a hurdle for a reason. Because different task verbs give you an indication as to how much you need to write about as the writer. So if the question says identify, you can write a sentence and you're done. Your sentence should be good. It should have, like, you should be answering the prompt. It can't just be a sentence about anything. You can't just tell them, like, the colors of your cat. But, like, you could be done in a sentence. But if the prompt says explain, that is the highest hurdle. So in order to get to that highest hurdle, you're going to have to provide like a paragraph's worth of explanation. And if you look at that, that's why it has here, provide information about the why or how of a relationship, process, pattern, position, or outcome using evidence and or reasoning. So you're going to want to have to explain something more in depth. I would say if we were going to order these in order of like lowest hurdle to highest hurdle, I would put identify as the lowest hurdle. Then above that, I would put define. Then I would put compare. Then I would put describe. Then I would put explain. Maybe compare and describe could be tied. But basically, if the question is asking for a define or identify, you don't need to offer an example of some sort. But other than that, if it's compare, explain, or describe, I would offer some sort of substantive example so that you could show the reader that you actually know what they're talking about so you can get full credit for your response. One thing I really liked in the Flipgrid videos you guys turned in this week is that you guys are offering concrete examples in your analysis to explain how you're answering the prompt. And so you are already verbally practicing this skill for me. So for the FRQs, it's really important that you integrate evidence into your response. So after you figure out how you want to answer the question, you want to consider what geographic themes you can incorporate into your response. If there's a map, a chart, a graph, a diagram with the question, you want to study it carefully before beginning your answer. You want to think about the evidence you studied during the course that relates to the question and then decide how it best fits into that analysis or explanation. Does it demonstrate a similarity or difference? Does it argue for or against the point that's being addressed? Does it ask you to identify, explain a certain number of examples or reasons? You want to pay attention to the prompt. The number one way that people don't get full credit is because they read the prompt and then they go off into this la-la land where they just like start writing random stuff down. But they're not thinking and sort of circling back to that prompt going, am I actually answering what's asking? Because that's important. You want to elaborate on the evidence. Don't just paraphrase or summarize your evidence. Don't just put like EX dot and then state a word. Like you want to state your intent, then use additional information or analysis to elaborate on how these pieces of evidence are similar or different. If there's evidence that refutes the statement, you explain why. Your answer should show that you understand the subtleties of the question. And you want to carefully answer each part of the question and be sure to use appropriate geographic terms and refer to models or theories when appropriate. We haven't talked about models or theories yet, but we will next week. Okay, so I think it's easier to talk about this if we look at an actual FRQ. Okay, this is not one that's been used by the College Board. This is actually one that another teacher wrote and that I put on the bottom of your Unit 1 study guide. And I always give you some example questions on your study guides. And then you also have example questions at the end of each chapter in your textbook, because I think that the more you practice the skill, the better you are at it. So some of you heard my daughter before playing the clarinet. Like, the way you get better at something is you practice it. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about tennis, running, the clarinet, FRQ writing, practice makes better. At our house, we never say practice makes perfect because perfect is not an attainable goal. So screw perfect. But practice makes better. So if you, and in the FRQ on the study guide, I gave you an article that actually helps you answer this question because you guys potentially don't know enough about Paris to actually answer this prompt, and so that's okay. We will look at a potential answer in a second, but what I would do is if you wanted to practice this prompt on your own, I would actually read that article. Super interesting. So it says here, it always has like a statement before the prompt that sort of gets you into the mood. So Paris, France has been inhabited for over 2,000 years by various cultures. And then it has A, defines site, B, defines situation, C, identify a factor of Paris's successful growth as a city, and then D, describe the advantages of Paris's site, E, explain why the situation of Paris is ideal for urban city growth, F, compare the differences in site and situation, G, compare Paris with another city with an advantageous site. So what you would want to do is actually answer all of these parts of the prompt, and there's 7 of them. You get a point for each part of the prompt. So this question is worth up to 7 points. But you can get partial credit. So if you could get points for A, B, C, and D, but not get points for E, F, and G, and still get a passing grade for this question, a 4 out of 7. Obviously, I'd rather have you get a 7 out of 7, but I'm just saying, like, you could get partial credit. You don't have to go, oh, I don't know F, therefore I'm screwed. No, it doesn't matter if you don't know F. If you should, and even if you don't, you should still try to write an answer to F, because you know what? You might know more than you think. But you can get partial credit. If you look at the verbs, and that's what we were talking about before, you will notice that for A, B, and C, you are able to write a shorter, more direct, more simplistic answer for full credit because of the type of verb that it is asking for. Define, identify. However, for D, E, F, G, they are using more complex verbs with higher hurdles. So describe, explain, compare. So you would want to write more and have substantive examples for D, E, F, and G. Okay? The next thing I want you to notice is that frequently they're asking you about Paris, but not always. So if you look at A and B and F, they are asking you about geographic terms in general. But if you look at C, D, E, and G, They are asking about Paris specifically. So even if you don't know anything about Paris, you should still be able to get 3 out of 7 points on this question, because we definitely, every geography student in the country has covered site and situation. Okay, so we're going to take a look at a crack that I made at answering this question. Okay, so I have here, site is the exact placement of a settlement on Earth. To show the site, you can use longitude and latitude. It can also mean the physical attributes of the place it occupies, like if it is at a convergence of 2 rivers. You would not need to write all of that. Like if you wanted to actually get this, you could just say site is the exact placement of a settlement on the Earth, period. Okay, I'm trying to show you that there's sort of like a range in which you can do things. For B, situation is where a place is in relation to its surrounding features. You could end it there. Or you could go on and say the features that it is located in reference to could be human-made or physical. If you look at, for example, E, you're going to need to offer, like the prompt for E asks you, explain. So that means you should have an example for E, right? Paris's situation was ideal for urban growth because it was near a major riverway and a large agricultural area. The riverway meant it could bring in, I forgot the word in, and out lots of goods, and the successful farming region meant it could feed a growing population. So I answer the question, and then I give an example. I explain how that answer is true. Okay? Or if you look at G, it says compare Paris with another city with an advantageous site. So Paris was built on an advantageous site because of the Seine River. The river was used to connect Paris to the rest of France, and it became a commercial center for the city and for Europe. Similarly, New York City was founded at the intersection of the Hudson River and the Atlantic Ocean. And the Hudson River was a way that goods could be transported inland to the growing American colonies. NYC similarly became a commercial center because of this advantageous site and was the largest city in the American colonies and remains the largest city in the United States. Okay, so basically what you do to answer an FRQ is that you want to be able to label your parts A, B, C, D, E, F, G, so that the reader can know, okay, this is their answer. This is their answer for that part, because you get individual points for each part. What you don't want to do is look at this question and then just start rambling and write a whole paragraph. Okay, basically a free response question is like a guided short answer part of the exam, where they're telling you exactly what they want you to tell them, and then you're going to write it in your own words. Okay? Before we look at this question with the practice FRQ, are there questions that you guys have about what I'm asking, about what I've said so far? And if you have them, I need you to verbally state them, or if somebody could verbally speak somebody else's questions, because I can't see them on the screen right now. Are there any questions that you guys have?
So will all the free response questions have like 7 parts to them?
Yes.
In the test?
Yes, they will. Although the one that you're going to do at the very end only has 4 parts to it, because I'm not trying to like make your hands hurt today. But yes, they do have 7 parts to them. Any other questions? Okay. So if we look at this one, this practice FRQ gives you different map projections. Okay? And it's not even asking you to identify any of them, although if you look for F, it's asking you to be able to figure out which one is the Gall-Peters projection and which is the Mercator projection, but not necessarily. It's just asking you to be able to explain why one is better than the other. But so if you look at A, define map projection, you would want to give at least a minimum of 1 sentence, but you could stop at 1 sentence in which you define what map projection means. Then for B, you want to explain the benefit of using map projections. And so it's not asking about any particular one, it's just explaining what the benefit is of using a map projection. Okay? For C, it's saying explain one benefit of using the projection used for B. Okay, so you would look at B, which is this one, okay? And you would have to go, oh, okay, I might not even know what this one is called, but I have to try to be able to analyze what are the benefits to using this type of format. Okay? For C, it would be asking you to compare this projection with this projection. Okay? And so like comparing. So you'd want to refer specifically to it. In map B, they do this. In map D, they do this, which gives them a different result on fill in the blank. But you'd want to, in your answer, directly compare those two things. For E, it says describe a drawback of using map projections. You could use one of these as your example there, and you could call it by name or you could point to it. Like you could say, a drawback of using map projections is that it has the ability to exaggerate a feature of the Earth in a way that is disproportionate to what it actually looks like on the 3D Earth. For example, in map A, Antarctica looks like the largest land surface on the planet, when, as a matter of fact, it is not true. Okay, so it's giving you that option. Okay, then for F, explain one way in which the Gall-Peters projection attempts to correct the pitfalls of the Mercator projection. So in this one, it expects you to know those two projections, and I would argue those are the only two that actually you have to keep up in your brain. Like there are a gazillion types of projections, and you don't have to know all of them. But this is an example of one that you could do on your own to sort of walk you through this idea of thinking about like how to approach an FRQ. Okay. This is the one that I'm going to have you guys do on your own and just have you type it in the chat box. And then I will cut and paste it into an email and I will give you some feedback on it. If someone is doing this and they couldn't come to our session today, they are going to submit this answer on Canvas and I will similarly give them some feedback. You could use your book, you could use the internet to answer this, but I'm going to have you practice this skill. And it's just going to have 3 parts, even though normally a prompt is 4 parts. So part A says define formal region. And so you would write a definition and you would want it to be a full sentence, okay? And you want it to be a complete sentence. You could start off a formal region is defined as blah, blah, blah. B, identify whether the image portrays an example of a formal, functional, or vernacular region. So you're going to look at this cell tower coverage map, and you've got Baltimore here, and you've got these cute, like you can see how far each cell tower covers, okay? And you're going to want to identify. So again, that's like one sentence. You know, the map portrays a blank region, okay? And then for C, you want to explain why using a regional approach to a cell phone connectivity is more beneficial than using political borders. So for C, you would want to explain that, and you would want to have at least one substantive example to explain why that is true.